Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this CIWEM membership webinar, registering as an environmental professional. My name is Barbara Orth. I am a Senior Membership and Professional Standards Executive here at CIWEM, and it is my pleasure to be hosting today's webinar. In a little bit, I will be joined by our very own Head of Membership and Professional Standards, Sophie Deniko, as well as two of our lovely volunteers and Chartered Environmentalist members, as well as professional reviewers, Tracy Dunford and Katie Pearson, who have very kindly agreed to join the conversation today and share their experience. To give a brief overview of what to expect from the structure of today's webinar, the title already says it. We will be talking about registering as an environmental professional with the Society for the Environment. We will kick off with an introduction given by myself about how to register as a Chartered Environmentalist, following which Sophie will give us an overview of our brand new and very exciting new registration, Registered Environmental Practitioner, or REnvP. After that, we will invite Katie and Tracy to join the conversation and kind of share their experience as well as some top tips, following which we will open the floor to the audience. So you'll have the opportunity to send in your questions, and please do ask us anything that you have on your mind. Now, just quickly before we kick off, just a few general housekeeping rules. This webinar is recorded and it will be made available on our website as well as on YouTube. So if you feel like you've missed anything or you want to revisit some of the topics and ideas that we've discussed, then please make sure to visit our website and YouTube. The webinar will be there so anyone can listen to it. Alongside this, we also have loads of other materials available on the website. So if we haven't quite covered all the topics, in great detail, obviously we're restricted by time. There are loads of guidance documents available both on our website as well as on the online application portal, which we encourage everyone to check out. Now, if you are experiencing any technical issues or difficulties, do please let us know in the chat using the chat function, and we will do our best to resolve it for you. Again, as I've mentioned, this webinar does have a Q&A function, so do send in your questions. This is a fantastic opportunity to ask any questions that you may have and get the inside scoop from two of our Chartered Environmentalists and professional reviewers. So we do encourage everyone to send in any questions they may have. And finally, fantastic news. This webinar does count to 1 hour of CPD, so make sure that you have, make sure that you add this to your CPD record. Yeah. Okay, so without further ado, let's kick off then, dive straight into becoming a Chartered Environmentalist. Now, a few words about what this actually is. So the Chartered Environmentalist registration is aimed for environmental professionals, independent of discipline, and it reflects a high level of skill and experience. And it really sets these registrants apart from others working in their field. It also enhances career prospects through establishing a proven expertise, experience, and commitment to professional standards. Now, in the UK and across the world, Chartered Environmentalists utilize their specific expertise to lead departments, advise governments, and work hands-on as practitioners. Now, in practice, who is eligible or who can apply for Chartered Environmentalists? So in very simple terms, the application requires master's degree level thinking, and this can be demonstrated either by actually having the master's degree or through a submission of written work deemed to be at an equivalent level by registration assessors. This is what we call work-based learning. So as I've said before, if you do not hold the master's degree, it's not a problem. You are still welcome to apply for Chartered Environmentalist if you have the required experience through our work-based learning route. This provides a means of enabling very experienced applicants who lack the exemplifying academic qualifications to demonstrate the knowledge and understanding which they have acquired through their work experience against the QA qualification descriptor for master's level, All of these documents, the forms that you need to fill in as part of this process are available from the website. So do make sure you check out all the information that is on there. All applicants for Chartered Environmentalists need to demonstrate the required professional competence and commitment. Individuals generally develop these through education and working experience. In terms of what is actually required from a Chartered Environmentalist submission for us with CIWEM, you will need to complete an online application form. Please note that in order to apply for Chartered Environmentalists, you do need to be a chartered member of CIWEM, or you will need to submit an application for chartered member alongside your Chartered Environmentalist application. What I mean when I say chartered member, this is our very own chartership grade. It's called Chartered Water and Environmental Manager, or CEnv. So you will need to be either a chartered member of CIWEM or submit an application for this alongside your CEnv application. You will also need to submit a copy of your most up-to-date CV, copies of your relevant certificates signed by your sponsors. What we mean by certificates, we usually mean university degree certificates and transcripts. But if you do feel like there are other relevant certificates that you can upload that might support your application, that you're more than welcome to do so. Very importantly, you will need to have 2 chartered sponsors, one of whom must hold Chartered Environmentalist. This is really so that they can review your application and make sure that, you know, everything is up to scratch. They will need to supply you with a signed letter to confirm that they have done so. You will also need to complete a 1,000-word career overview report. Think of this as a narrative of your career to date. So any highlights, any important projects that you have undertaken that has led you to where you find yourself currently in your career. Furthermore, you will also need to submit a training record, a CPD record for the last 3 years. Our requirement for this is 90 hours on a rolling basis over a 3-year period. And perhaps the most important element of any application is the 4,000-word mandatory competence attainment report. I will go into a little bit more detail about these in a little bit. And finally, Chartered Environmentalist work-based applicants, work-based learning applicants will need to also complete the work-based learning form available for download from the website. Now, if you're also applying for chartered membership at the same time, that you will find that most of these elements overlap, other than the mandatory competence attainment report. So you don't have to submit duplicates for both CEnv and CEnv application. One copy of each of these requirements is sufficient. Just bearing in mind that if you are applying for chartered membership, so CEnv, you will also need a sponsor who holds CEnv. So the way the sponsors work out is that you should aim to cover all the registrations that you're applying for, essentially. So as I've promised before, I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of the Chartered Environmentalist mandatory competencies that you are required to meet. As you can see, these are grouped into 4 categories. The first category, the A category, focuses on application of knowledge and understanding of the environment to further the aims of sustainability. And what they mean by this is really just demonstrating an underpinning knowledge of sustainability principles in management of the environment. You will also need to talk about environmental knowledge and principles in pursuit of sustainable environmental management. You will also need to demonstrate your ability to analyze and evaluate problems from an environmental perspective, develop practical sustainable solutions, as well as anticipate environmental trends to develop practical solutions. The second category is about leading sustainable management of the environment. And here we're talking about promoting behavioral and cultural change by influencing others, promoting a strategic environmental approach, and demonstrating leadership. The C competencies focus on effective communication as well as interpersonal skills. So really everything that's got to do with communication here. So, you know, the ability to liaise, negotiate with, you know, clients and stakeholders, you know, to handle conflict and advise others, as well as demonstrating leadership and management skills. And finally, the final category of competencies is personal commitment to professional standards, recognizing obligations to society, the profession, and the environment. So this is really just an umbrella category for sub competencies, and everything goes in here, for starting with relevant codes of conduct and practice, ethics, understanding environmental ethical dilemmas as well, taking responsibility for personal development, and working towards secure change, and as well as encouraging others to promote and advance a sustainable and resilient approach. These mandatory competencies, as well as a very detailed guideline of how to meet each competency, is also available to download from the website. So if you are looking to apply for Chartered Environmentalist, we do recommend everyone carefully reads through this guidance document. So I think with that, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Sophie, who's going to introduce us and to tell us a little bit more about registering as REnvP. Welcome, Sophie. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. The floor is yours.
Many thanks, Barbara. So as Barbara mentioned, the Registered Environmental Practitioner registration is a brand new environmental registration from the Society for the Environment. It's available to CIWEM members with the appropriate environmental knowledge and experience. It's really the ideal way to verify that you've been recognised by your peers to meet a high standard of professionalism in your environmental work, and demonstrates your competence to implement good practice, make informed decisions, and coordinate projects, all within a code of professional conduct. REnvP recognises the knowledge, skills and commitment of professionals who work to protect and enhance the environment, providing an opportunity to highlight your capabilities to employers, clients and the public, as well as being a personal career achievement. So REnvP registrants are expected to have acquired a level of knowledge applicable to the QCS level 5 qualifications. That's equivalent to a foundation degree, for example. The registration therefore sits below the Society for the Environment's other registration offered by CIWEM, CEnv, and that sits to level 7. So within CIWEM, this grade is aligned to our non-chartered or CIWEM membership grade, and members will need to hold this grade to apply. So as part of your career aspirations, you may wish to use REnvP as a clear pathway to environmental chartership, perhaps when you're kind of 3 to 5 years within your career. The REnvP and the Chartered Environmental Competencies are directly linked. So this offers a progressionary route to your chartership goals, whilst gaining the additional knowledge and experience required for CEnv. You can demonstrate your ambition with the REnvP registration. Alternatively, REnvP can be the perfect fit for you and your career aims. So REnvP registrants like CEnv can work in a wide variety of roles, disciplines and sectors, and can live and work anywhere in the world. They have a level of autonomy, provide advice, inform senior leaders, and play coordinating roles within projects. So an REnvP working within the water and environment sector might have job roles including things like assistant consultant, biodiversity officer, environmental consultant, technical advisor, engineer, environmental scientist, graduate roles, and other forms of technical advisors. And as illustrated by these job roles, REnvP can work in either a core environmental role or as an environmental specialist in a related role. In addition, any graduates at the level 6 environmental practitioner degree apprenticeship will be ideally placed to gain REnvP due to the level of practical experience and relevant knowledge obtained. So onto the application. If you're interested in applying for REnvP registration with CIWEM, as I mentioned earlier, must be a member, an CIWEM with CIWEM. You must have the knowledge and skills required to that level 5 qualification level, have at least 2 years full-time relevant postgraduate work experience, maintain a CPD record, and agree to comply with the CIWEM Code of Conduct and Professional Ethics and the Society for the Environment Code of Professional Conduct. The application requirements for REnvP follow very closely to the CEnv ones. So what you need to submit is a up-to-date copy of your CV, copies of relevant certificates, which must be validated by a sponsor. You must have 2 sponsors who are CIWEM members, one of which must also hold CEnv or REnvP to review your application, and they must submit a signed letter confirming they've done so. You must submit a CPD record for 2 years, and like CEnv, submit that mandatory competence attainment report that describes how your practical experience meets the 12 REnv competencies. Now, the REnvP competencies are in the same categories that Barbara covered earlier, however, at that level 5 rather than level 7 level. So again, on our website and on the Society of the Environment website, you'll find detailed guidance on what you need to, what evidence you need to talk about in that competence report to ensure you meet all of those 12 competencies. And additionally, you can find the application forms and competency competency report templates on the CIWEM website. So that's ciwem.org/membership/REnvP. On to you, Barbara.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Sophie. Yes, so this is our very brand new registration. So we are very excited to be able to offer this to anyone who is interested. So I think without further ado, I'm going to invite our 2 panelists, Tracy and Katie, to join the conversation. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen so it has more of a conversation feel. Just by way of introduction, allow me to please introduce both of our lovely panelists. So Tracy Dunford has over 20 years experience working within water resources, including hydrometric monitoring, hydrology, and water resources planning. She is now a lead advisor and expert on water resources planning, including drought management in Wales. She also leads on policy and guidance for developing water resources management plans and drought plans. Tracy is a chartered water and environmental manager, a chartered environmentalist, and a chartered scientist, as well as a member of CIWEM's Welsh branch, and is also a professional reviewer and interviewer. Katie Pearson graduated in environmental science in 2003 and has been working in the water sector since then, mostly in flood risk management. She got chartered in 2011, both chartered water and environmental manager, as well as chartered environmentalist, and is now a member of CIWEM's Professional Standards Committee and acts as a professional reviewer and interviewer. She currently works as a technical director in the water team at AECOM, where she leads the community of hydraulic modelers working in water resources and water utilities. Thank you both of you for joining us today and for volunteering to share your experience with everyone listening in. I think I'm just going to kick off the conversation with kind of a very basic and fundamental question, which is, why did you choose, or what motivated you to apply for Chartered Environmentalist? Was it your own decision? Was this a request by your employer, or how did you come to apply? Who would like to start?
Do you want me to go first?
Yeah, absolutely.
Hi, yeah. It was purely a decision driven by myself, to be fair, because I was in Environment Agency Wales. I'd had about 10 years under my belt. I'd done a part-time master's a few years before that was supported via work, and it felt like a natural progression to pursue CIWEM, which was close fit to my work area, being in a regulator. And I noticed that a lot of the flood risk colleagues were doing CIWEM, but not so many in water resources. So I was interested in perhaps leading the way to become one of the first to become chartered, and then help others within the organisation to follow me, which has actually happened now. There's been quite a few people following now as a result internally. And those days, 10 years ago, it was a slightly less challenging route, although still just as challenging in that we only had a few competencies to fill out. So I'm glad to see that there's different ones for chartered environmentalists, because I feel it gives a bit more detail around the competencies than just doing one set. But so I've been chartered environmentalist for a long time, and through the years, as our organisation's changed to Natural Resources Wales, And Welsh Government itself has introduced its own legislation for public authorities and water companies to abide by that covers the sustainable management of natural resources and well-being. It's become very key that people become more aware of becoming either a chartered environmentalist or pursue other courses that are available for sustainable management of natural resources. So it very much helps to be recognised, and I'm pleased that there's now a stepping stone in the middle, because sometimes it can be quite a scary to rush. You know, people might rush into it too soon and realise they haven't quite got all the experience. So at least this gives people the opportunity to consider, I might, you know, do the other one first, and then sit back and gather the experience. I'll do top tips later, because I think we'll probably come around those on the questions, you know. So I think that's it for now.
And we might get some questions from the audience. Sorry, Katie, before we go over to you, I'm just going to encourage the audience to send in any questions that they may have for our panelists to answer later on. Sorry, Katie, over to you.
That's okay. So yeah, I think I must have got chartered about the same time as Tracy, 10 years ago. In my case, I would say I was very strongly encouraged to be a chartered, a CIWEM, a chartered member of CIWEM by work. So different to Tracy, I work in consultancy, and in consultancy, there's quite a lot of pressure to get chartered because when we are applying for or tendering for projects or frameworks, we need staff who are chartered to fulfill certain roles. So I certainly got the pressure from work to do it, to do the CIWEM bit. And I think the CEnv side came sort of separately because, as you said, I did environmental science at university, which was a really lovely broad degree. And I went off to university because I wanted to change the world and I wanted to make it a better place. And I loved doing environmental science and how broad that was. And then my career quickly became quite specialised in flood risk management. But I think by applying for the CEnv part of it, it demonstrates that while I may be a flood risk specialist, I'm aware of the bigger picture. I know how flood risk management fits in to wider environmental issues, how I contribute to sustainable development through the work I do. And so that CEnv bit just shows that that I'm part of the bigger picture.
Fantastic, thank you. Just to jump on the idea that you've already mentioned, Katie, so if there was that, you know, requirement or request from your employer to register, do you feel like registering as an environmental professional helped you overcome any career barriers, or has it supported your career development, or what was kind of, and Tracy as well, what is your take on this?
It's certainly, I can't think of specific barriers that it's helped me overcome, but it has helped me progress. And I know that there are promotions and opportunities that I've had because I'm chartered, and I've been able to do that. So yeah, I think it has helped me progress. It helped me very much when I moved from my first job into another role a couple of years after I got chartered. And I was going into a more broad environmental role at the time, and I think having that CEnv behind me showed my new employer that actually, yeah, I had my specialism and I had a broad range of knowledge as well.
Can I add that obviously I talked about when I applied that necessarily it was my idea, but can I add now that regulators, particularly at Natural Resources Wales, are now very much encouraging continued professional development, whichever one you choose, and encouraging people to be chartered, because usually at you work through the grades, the natural progression is higher up, that they were looking for people to be members or chartered, and it makes sense to encourage people, you know, to also consider chartered environmentalist if they've got the masters or the experience around to do it, to see beyond the bigger picture. So if you're in maybe a modelling or data role, you know, very much encouraged to understand, well, what is the importance of your data and how is that feeding into decision making across the business, so that you start to see the bigger picture. And as a result, the organisation is encouraging people to do work experience in other departments and really encourage them to think outside the box. So now it's very much a steer towards supporting individuals through their teams and through a mentor program within our organisation to encourage that. So I think the tide is changing now over time, as well as then if we're dealing with consultants, it looks better also if, you know, if you're pretty much operating at the same professional level.
Fantastic, thank you. And Tracy, you've already mentioned this briefly, but just I was hoping if we could perhaps expand on this a little bit more, whether, you know, perhaps if the REnvP registration was available for you at earlier stage in your career, would you have applied for it, or would you encourage people to apply for it if they find themselves at the beginning of their career? Is that something that you would encourage?
Well, I have to admit that I took a very convoluted route because I didn't think I was ready for Chartered Environmentalist, so I sat on it for 2 or 3 years to work up the experience. So if that had been available, then I would have at least, you know, rather than being an environmental partner for a few years, because I don't think that exists now, but it was then, I would have potentially applied sooner, and that perhaps would have given me the confidence then to, you know, perhaps apply for Chartered Environmentalist sooner as well. So I certainly agree that it's allowing people, there's a lot more other in between things available as well when we're around. So I think that's a good thing to be doing if you can, and it will open up doors hopefully for you to have the discussions around how can I then have another step to get the competencies in these areas. I mean, you may well find that maybe 3 or 4 competencies is all you need to be working on, that you have the experience. So I would advise people sit down with a mentor and talk through your career, and who knows the process to decide whether they think you're ready or not as well. That's a good step to be doing.
I was thinking about it. I don't know about you, but I'm all for like to-do lists, and my life is run by lists. And I find that if you've
I'm
got
a planner.
yeah, if you've got something in the list, and it seems a bit daunting, it helps to break it down into smaller actions that you can tick off. And I was thinking that actually, yeah, the REnvP, it can be one of those steps. If your ultimate goal is to get chartered and to become a CEnv, well, putting the REnvP in as a sort of a medium-term goal is a nice step on the way. It will show you that actually applying for one of these registrations is not as scary as you might have built it up in your head, and it will give you the confidence that, yep, I've ticked one off, I'm on my way to the big one.
Sophie, you did clarify, didn't you? I might have missed it. You didn't have to be, you just needed to be a member CIWEM to apply for that one, didn't you? Yeah,
that's correct.
Yeah, because it's relatively new to us, so it's a new one. So
and actually, while we're talking about the application and the practicalities of applying, I'm going to ask Sophie to jump in here as well with some useful tips about, you know, what kind of like are the tick boxes that you should do when you're applying. We've already talked about having a mentor, you know, and relying on their guidance and support, but what kind of other aspects are there that people should bear in mind before applying, either for Chartered Environmentalist or for REnvP?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Sophie, off you go.
Yeah, I think I would reiterate the things you said, and going back to what Katie said, a list is always useful to kind of double check your submission is complete, and really use your sponsor or mentors, if you have them, to review your application. That role is less of it is a checkbox, but equally it is a supportive role to use their own experience going through the process to kind of confirm that you have met that competence level. And there are equally lots of people that you may know that hold registration as either with the Society for the Environment or otherwise, that can also provide a little bit of guidance and support on their own experience, especially when it comes to CEnv and the kind of professional review and interview aspect of the application, and any opportunity you have to do kind of practice interviews, I would encourage that as much as possible, just so you can get more comfortable about what you are going to be saying, and get used to talking about yourself. I think that's one of the things that we often see in applications, both written and the interview aspect, is people fall into talking about we rather than I, and that's something that's often hard to do, and you need to kind of get yourself in the correct frame of mind to do. But can kind of control F on your application to search for where you've said we and see how you can change that into an I is definitely something I would encourage.
Yeah, and also, which depending on what organisation you work for, find out if they've got a Chartership mentor scheme, because I know I'm pretty sure the Environment Agency does. I know NRW does, and they will guide you through the process and sit down with you and talk you through the application process and work out with you, you know, what's your best route, are you ready, and mentor you through that, or indeed go to the local local branch events and ask for help and advice there as well, and there'll be plenty of people to guide you. But I'd say don't be too afraid to wait until you're ready. I mean, sometimes there's an advantage to sitting back, reflecting, because there may be 3 or 4 competencies you're not quite ready with, and if you've got it on your career development planning work, they can help identify areas to expand upon, and that's so hopefully organisations are supportive of it, and then you know, and then apply then for the relevant ones, and you'll always get feedback from that anyway, and if you're invited to interview, you're obviously ready, and you just I would advise trying to find someone who will give you a mock interview or talk you through the process before you go there, because it could be quite daunting, because it's, as you say, it's about you and only you know about you, and it'll be talking to you about your experience. It's not like you're going up a predetermined interview for a job where you're compared against the same level. It will be all about what you've written, so you know, it might seem a very different type of interview, so be prepared.
I think the one additional thing I'd mention is your CPD record. I would really encourage you to start, you know, don't leave that to the last minute. Really, that should be something that you record on an ongoing basis, not only so it stays up to date, but really so you can write the reflective elements of it kind of proactively and look at the forward planning as you're doing it. Yeah, we certainly had applicants that I think have tried to write their 3-year CPD record in the week before their applications are due, and yeah, I don't think that's the best approach. So start that, you know, either when you're thinking about, you know, start just thinking about the competencies and the registration or as kind of early as possible in your career, because it's a great habit to get into and really helps not only in your application but with your kind of career development as well.
I was going to say exactly the same, Sophie. In the couple of years now that I've been doing the reviews and the interviews, the one thing that I've picked up and taken back to colleagues at ACOM who are getting ready for chartership is the CPD record and keeping on top of it. And I think particularly when you look at the competencies, both for CIWEM but also for CEnv, you've got those first competencies, which I won't get the wording exactly right, but it's about things that are outside your immediate area of work, your understanding of environmental issues, sustainable development outside what you do in your day-to-day job. And that's really, we see a lot of applications where actually we mark that as a weaker competence or even a fail, because people haven't stretched outside of their area. So I think that one is it can be fun, it can be interesting. Like if like me, you've come, as I said, from environmental science background, it's your chance to actually to go back to some of that stuff that you learned about at university and to see how things have moved on. So at the moment, I would, if I was looking at applicants coming for CIWEM or CEnv, I'd be expecting to see some talk about the COP26 climate change conference that's happening this year, what people think we need to get out of that, what will a successful conference look like. I'd expect to learn something maybe about net zero and what their organisation or the people they work for are doing to get that. So, and that's the kind of thing that you need more of for CEnv than you do for CIWEM. You really need that rounded and more interesting stuff. So read the paper, watch the news, be able to have intelligent conversations around those topics.
I agree. The A1, the wider environmental issues, and the sustainability C3 ones seem to be the ones that seem a bit weaker, mainly I think because the writer assumes you've inferred it from their career profile and everything else. Well, don't assume that we know it, please write it. And that's why perhaps in the interviews then you get we focus quite a lot on those areas, and yes, please keep up with what's happening in the world, and be prepared to be asked a bit more about how you feel you or your organization fits within that.
Fantastic, thank you. And while we're just on the subject of mandatory competencies, I'm just going to jump in there with another question. If we look at the CEwem and CEnv mandatory competencies, we find that there are certain similarities and certain overlapping elements. What would your recommendation be for applicants to avoid, copy pasting answers from one competency to the other?
Yeah, sometimes, I don't know about you, is a bit of a frustration sometimes because it feels like they haven't thought about it. Perhaps from my point of view, and Katie can agree, perhaps from the Chartered Water Environmental Manager, you're perhaps looking for a more general overview of how you're working within water and environment management. And then for the CEnv ones, you want to delve into the detail then of the bigger detail about it, how it fits in to the sustainable development principles, how it fits into economy, people, well-being, and really take the first example, and then re-emphasize it and expand it out to the bigger picture. So you want to add that extra bit of context, the extra bit of understanding. You could be a hydrometrist, for example, and you could manage a whole hydrometric network, and you can talk about water problems that's associated with. But then for the Chartered Environmentalist bit, you need to really home into that network's really important for water company planning, for drought management, for flood risk, for people's livelihood, for licensing, and you're really expanding why is it important that there's a hydrometric network. And I think some people think the example of just saying I manage a hydrometric network is enough to answer that other question, when really perhaps we're looking for that little bit more detail, how it fits into a bigger picture. I'm just picking any example, there isn't any one specific example. But so please don't fall into the trap of repeating it. Although we do get examples where someone's answered the CEnv one in detail and then put it in the first one. But it does help to keep the assessor interested, to show a bit more wider breadth, and perhaps don't fall into the trap of doing exact wording. Please use the exact example maybe, but please try and expand it when you're covering it across the other competencies, because that was the whole reason why I moved from the standard competencies from 10 years ago, to try and get that wider breadth answered in them. Don't know about you, Katie.
Yeah, I agree. You've just explained that really well, Tracy. What we don't want copy and paste answers. I find when I see that, and I'm like, I think I've read this before, and then I'm going back and I'm checking, and then that's put me into a bad mood, and that's not what you want when I'm reviewing your application. So I love to see the same project, like you've just said, and to have seen your role in it explained in one way for the CIWEM project, and then the bigger picture explained differently for the CEnv competence. That's really good, and it's a really good connectivity, and it will also make it easier to talk about at interview. But not the copy paste of whole chunks.
And I would advise, if you're perhaps in an organisation that has other examples predetermined, which does come across sometimes when you're reading them, they look like a stockpile answer. Please try and make it clear that it's your work, because sometimes people fall into a trap of being influenced to copy someone else's example. So use their example as the level, but please remember to tailor it towards what you've done. And some people fall in the trap of mentioning complicated British standards and things that, or things they don't know anything about really. They know their organisation knows about it, they should know about it. Don't fall in the trap of overcomplicating it and putting things in that you know a little bit about, but then if questioned you might fall apart. So just write what you're confident about as well, I would say. No.
Thank you both of you. That was very, very helpful and useful. In the meantime, we've also received a question from one of our audience members, which I'm going to read out loud for the both of you. It reads, I found the guidance document not as detailed as the one for CEwem Chartership. I especially found D3 environmental ethical dilemmas quite tricky to answer. Do you have any advice about how to answer that?
Yeah, yeah, very interesting. Yeah, it's like because it's after your opinion and your experience about an ethical dilemma that you might know about, or you could look at it from the point of view of about the ethical dilemma of, we all know that we want the government to cut carbon emissions, but you've got the ethical dilemma of you individually being able to do your thing, but you can't get the government to change. So how do you go about influencing, and what dilemma, to what point do you? Yeah, I mean, demonstrating that is a hard one to answer, aren't I here? And you've got to think about the scale of the dilemma. What is the problem you're trying to talk about, and then how it affects you and how it affects others, and who has the power to change that dilemma, and try and demonstrate your thoughts about how that might be achieved. And it could be an exact example of something that you're part of or experienced with. I could perhaps think of one in drought management where you've got that ethical dilemma about who gets water at times of drought. Is it water supply? Is it agriculture for food production, or is it for private water supplies? And you've got that ethical dilemma, and you can either say, how you personally may be involved in that decision making to solve that, or it could be a topic that you really think is a problem, and how you think it should be addressed, and how it could be achieved as an individual, and how you as an individual can influence others. So yeah, so you could be talking about a really small dilemma. It could be whether a flood defence scheme should be built by a council or a flood agency in your local park, and you think that's an ethical dilemma because you're going to be removing trees and destroying habitat. How do you weigh up putting a flood defence scheme in versus saving people's lives and properties? So that sort of dilemmas like that. So think about the scale of the issue that's really important to you. Why is it a dilemma? And then what is your thoughts about how that can be resolved?
Yeah, and I think it is possibly one that's easier to answer if you come from a consultancy background, because we tend to work for a variety of clients. So sometimes you might be working for the regulator, and then you might come along and be working for a developer in the same catchment, and you might then have some sort of conflicts and some dilemmas around the work that you're doing in the same area. Also, we work a lot on, or I've worked a lot on infrastructure schemes, so road or railway schemes that are big multidisciplinary projects, and I'm coming from my flood risk perspective, and I know what I want to achieve from a flood risk perspective, but that's got to be balanced against what the ecologists are advising, or what the geotechnical specialists are advising, as well as health and safety and all sorts. So you quite often end up in not conflict, but dilemmas there, and would have some project examples to share. I think it's also worth, sorry, I was just going to say, Tracy, I think you don't have to be able to resolve the dilemmas. The competence isn't asking that you've resolved them. It's that you've understood that it was a dilemma and you've acted appropriately, which might be to escalate it to somebody else and ask for advice. It might be to step away from something. You don't have to solve the problem.
I mean, you're also basically talking about what the problem is, why it was a problem, and then how you might prioritize weigh up different options to solve that problem, and how some of it was in conflict with each other, and then potentially was there an outcome or not. So you're working through like the tools you did to assess to solve it, or not to solve it in some cases, and then what was the consequence of that. Or it could just simply be, you know, how do you solve climate change? It's a whole world dilemma. You could potentially, you know, what you think the thoughts are there. It's a debate piece, really. It's to show a thought, isn't it? You thought through it.
Thank you. Just before we move on to the next question, I think if people are looking for more specific advice on each individual competency, the Society for the Environment also has a wide range of webinars available for people to watch and listen to, where all of these elements are discussed in a little bit more detail. So that's also a fantastic resource if you're just a little bit unsure as to how to answer each competency. Then yeah, do make sure to check those out. In the meantime, we've also received another question, which I think Sophie might be best placed to answer because it's quite process related. And it reads, at which point in the environmental practitioner degree apprenticeship can I apply as an REnvP?
That really depends on kind of your other experience around it. But if it's the degree apprenticeship that you're kind of is your environmental experience, it would be following graduation, when you've kind of gained that qualification, that you'd look for your practitioner registration at that point.
But as you alluded to, if you've already got 10 years experience in another organisation, then you might be ready to do it straight away. Yeah, depending on the background.
Yeah, that might be a slightly more individual case. So I would encourage people to send any questions like that, where we can perhaps look at your qualifications and experience. Just drop a note to our membership inbox, membership@CIWEM.org, and we can review those kind of on an individual basis, just to make sure we give you the best advice.
Thank you so much. Just keeping an eye on the time, and I'd just like to remind our audience to send in their questions if you have any, because we're slowly starting to run out of time, unfortunately. I'm just going to throw in another question for our panel, just taking a step back from simply just the competencies and just look at the application as a whole, and particularly at CPD. Very frequently we get the question whether CPD should be tailored to, you know, the registration that you're applying for. I mean, the short answer is no, but I was just wondering whether you could perhaps expand on that idea a little bit.
Well, personally, I mean, if you think about it, the competencies fall into knowledge of wider environment generally and water issues, communication and project management, health and safety, and general learning. And, you know, so I think most organisations, I think you would have an opportunity to be involved in health and safety. You got examples of where you may have done project management training. So I think you've put it all down, because if it fits into the skill sets, it makes sense to put it down. And I think a lot of people don't realise what they're doing in their day jobs qualifies as CPD. I get asked that, should I have put this health and safety webinar that I went to, you know, down? And I'm like thinking, yeah, well, it's all relevant, because it's showing that you know, you've done health and safety and you're understanding health and safety protocols. And other people ask, well, should I have put the talk down that I went to for the local branch, or any other institution, not necessarily just CIWEM ones? And they don't realise that you need to be putting them down. But then you're invited to say how you think they fit into the benefits. So that's where you then say how you think it might link to the chartership you're applying for, or how it's relevant to you or others. You know, so just remember, like reading articles, watching TV programs, attending webinars, going to workshops. You know, there might be a training session that you led in work where you're mentoring, coaching others, or training you've specifically been on. So I'd certainly, you don't disadvantage yourself by putting it down, as long as you demonstrate how it's relevant, of course.
Yeah.
You know, so an hour of EastEnders probably doesn't count, you know, if you get my meaning.
We like to see a variety, I think, don't we?
Yeah.
That's what you want. You don't want to find for example, someone who has just watched a back catalogue of CIWEM YouTube videos. You want to see that mixed up with some independent learning and some reading, probably depending on your organisation, some organisation specific training, learning on the job as well. That's valid CPD if you can explain what you did. But yeah, as Tracy said, that the name doesn't always mean that much to us when we're reviewing it. We're looking at those extra comments about how it fits into your role, about what the benefits are for you and for your organisation, and what you're going to do next with it, and looking for how things link into your future career plan are just as important, and one that I've certainly been picking up on at interview with a lot of people recently.
Yes, and it's always good to demonstrate things that you might have led on as well, as well as they just want to see development through the progression. And I think it's just the last, is it 3 years at least? But can you put more in? Yeah, 3 years. Yeah. So I would suggest that when you do, maybe each month or every quarter, note down a list of things that you've done. So you've got a working list and then put them into your account. And so you're not left with a whole 3 years worth back catalogue to fill out, because you tend to rush it then.
That just ties back to what Sophie mentioned earlier about starting to record your CPD early on. Before we kind of start closing off the webinar, I just wanted to mention that we've covered a lot of information here today. So if anyone has any questions, then please do get in touch with us, with the CIWEM membership team. The email address is membership@ciwem.org. We are more than happy to help, either with specific advice or with some guidance documents, or even pointing you in the right direction as to where to find information. We are here to help, so please do get in touch. Pending any further questions, thank you, Tracy, for posting the email address in the chat for everyone to see. Pending any further questions or final questions from the audience, I would like to invite you to perhaps share some closing thoughts, final tips. Yes.
Yeah, I was going to say also, please keep an eye out of the networks and panels and the activities of the additional groups, like the Sustainable Urban Drainage Group or the Rivers and Coastal Group, because you may find get involved in some of their events. I mean, when we can do in-person events, or talking to local branch members will help you through the process. So don't feel afraid to go online, find someone's name, if there's a contact details, to contact them as well, because they might meet you and talk you through it all. And please do apply, but don't rush into it. I would say I'd sit back, take it step by step. It's not it's not first past the post. It's through your own timescale.
Yeah, I'd echo that, Tracy, but yeah, strongly on the please do apply. I think you'll find that when you go through the process, as you're working through it, it gives you a real confidence boost to say, oh yeah, I am either nearly there or I'm there. Look at all these different things that I've achieved and that I'm competent in. So it gives you a confidence boost, and it gives you credibility among your colleagues, among people in the wider network of other organisations you might work with. It shows that you know the detail of your job, and you know the bigger picture that it fits into. And it's certainly opened doors to me, and now as a reviewer and assessor and a reviewer, and the fact that I do that for the CEnv, I love seeing the variety of applicants that come through, and just reminding myself of how much is going on in the environmental sector that I wouldn't be seeing otherwise.
I learn a lot about Hong Kong lately that I would never have known about.
Yep, indeed. And I've got to know other CEnv people, like Tracy and I interviewed together, and I've met others through CEnv that I wouldn't have come across otherwise.
Thank you so much. Sophie, do you have anything final to add?
I think just picking up what Katie just mentioned, we really hope that, you know, that successful certificate is not the kind of end of the journey or your engagement. There's so many different ways to get engaged with CIWEM, both when you're thinking about applying, but when you've gained your chartership as well, be it through our local branches, our groups, our technical networks, things like our magazine, or even kind of volunteering as an interviewer and assessing yourself, so you can help the kind of next cohorts and generations see their kind of chartership goals succeed.
Thank you so much. I think that is a fantastic to note to end the webinar on. I would like to extend my thanks and our thanks for Katie, Tracy and Sophie for joining us today and for taking the time to talk us through their experience as well as sharing some useful tips. Thank you as well to the audience for joining. I hope you have found this useful and instructive. As we've mentioned before, do get in touch if you have any further questions, and the recording of this webinar will be made available, so you can always revisit it at any time. I think that's everything from us. I wish everyone a fantastic rest of the day. Thank you for joining and look after yourselves.